Hello, historians. Welcome to week 3. We've made it pretty far. We're almost a quarter of the way through the semester. As you notice, I'm trying to up my Zoom game a little bit. I'm trying a microphone, make the sound quality a little bit better. I know there's, at least to my ears, there's been a little too much of clicking of my mouse. It's kind of annoying, so this will hopefully get rid of that. As you also see in a minute, I'm trying a new Zoom format to see how we like this different kind of slideshow. But first, some housekeeping to do. So let me bring up the Learn site. There's just, I think, one thing, maybe two, I can't remember, that I want to go over briefly with you. Okay. First of all, it seemed like submitting both of your assignments last week was not a big deal. So that was good. I mean, part of what I wanted you to do this week is not just to do the assignments, but also the sort of practicing of how do you submit assignments in Learn. There were a few hiccups and I interacted with a couple people, but I think for the most part, we've got it down and we seem to understand it. If in the future, if you feel like you didn't quite understand it, even if you got your assignment in this week, let me know and I can give you some more pointers on that. But for the most part, I saw they came in and they were great. I'll talk about those in a second. But I just wanted to point out, let me think, I don't think there's anything else. Everything else is sort of the same as it was last week. You're going to have the same thing, right? You're watching a video. Your readings are going to be up in the readings folder. You're going to do an activity and you're going to do a response. Slightly different from last week is I'm going to give you the response at the beginning of the week too. So you can go ahead and sit down with the 2 very short readings you have, do the activity, do the response, and be done if you want by, Monday or Tuesday. That's up to you. And there's a quiz this week as well. Okay, the only thing the only other thing I wanted to let you know, in case you hadn't checked out the My Grades folder, I know some of you probably check it every week and some of you maybe have never interacted with this before. If you click on My Grades, and I have sort of a dummy account in Learn that I've been putting numbers in just so I can show it to you and I can sort of see what it looks like from the student point of view. But so far, this is what it should look like. We've done it, right? Week 1 quiz, a week 1 activity, a week 2 activity, a week 2 quiz, and a week 2 Robinson, which is your reading response. So you'll have, right, the total number of points from everything, the number of points you have there. And so if you want to be sort of keeping track and keeping along, you can do that. One thing to know is that at the end of the semester, I don't just take all the points and divide 19 by 21 and say, oh, look, it's a 95%, you got an A. If you go back to the syllabus, you'll notice that there are that each category has sort of a different percentage of the total grade. So there is some math involved at the end. And if sort of as we're getting to the end of the semester, you want a better idea of what your grade, your total grade is, just shoot me an email and I can figure it out very quickly. The only other thing I wanted to say about grading at this point is for right now, for this week, for these first 2 weeks, Cassidy and I are just doing the grades out of the total number of points, and we're not doing extensive comments. Now, part of that is I wanted to make sure between the 2 of us, we figure out a system to do this grading and to pump all this out every week. But also the beginning, a lot of these early assignments and activities are for you to sort of try things out. So there will be weeks where where the 2 of us are gonna give comments and feedback on your assignments. And if that happens, what actually you'll see, and I should have done it on one here so I could show the example, but what you actually see is next to the number of points you get, there's a little sort of talk bubble. And if you click on that talk bubble, it just opens a little window with our comments that says something like, that'll say something like, really great on this part, but this part seemed weak or something like that. Okay, so just be on the lookout. If you click on the grades and you see that little bubble, that's what that bubble means. Click on it, see what we have to say. Okay, just wanted to let you know that the grading is, we are trying to keep up with it every week because there is stuff due every week. I don't want the 2 of us to have a backlog and be literally sort of buried under a pile of grading. And so our goal, and I think we can keep up with it, is to do the grading every week, so that sort of by the time you're getting a new one of these videos, all of your last week's stuff should be graded and uploaded, or certainly by, I would say, Sunday night, that week's stuff should be done. Okay, let's keep moving on though, because there's a lot of stuff that I want to get to today. And I already know this is going to be a slightly longer video, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, what I'm going to do now is get to the PowerPoint, but I'm going to do it a little bit different. So we're going to see how this goes, and I am curious, and I might actually send out a survey after I do this new type of viewing of slides to see what you think. All right, give it a moment. So you should see that first slide. Oh, and there I am. Hi. Hi. Okay, we're going to try this. This is a new Zoom format. Maybe you've seen it. Maybe you've had another professor try this out, but I'm going to see sort of how I like this, how you like this. Okay, so the topic of the week is what changed in Paris. Before I do that, I just wanted to say a couple things. Oops, sorry, I can't use the keyboard. I have to use the mouse. That's a little annoying. That's okay. About the Robinson reading from last week. First of all, I was very impressed both by the activity. You guys did exactly what you were asked to do. That was a really easy one to grade. Also the responses. It was really clear that you guys carefully read this piece, that you were really engaging it with you. You got it. And some of that I do attribute to Martha Robinson. I think this is a really good article in terms of she clearly laid out what she was trying to argue, what her evidence was. And I think I found it certainly very convincing, and based on the reading responses, most of you found it very convincing as well. So there's lots of things to take away from this article, and most of you got sort of the main things that I wanted you to take away in terms of sort of what this early interaction was and how the British, right, that they didn't sort of come in and say, tell me about your medicine, I'm so eager to learn about it. They came in, and one of the things they did was they sort of accepted particular medical knowledge, mostly in the form of remedies versus medicine, which I loved that some of you sort of picked out the difference here between Indian remedies and English medicine and why she used those two words. But then they sort of figure out a way to fit, right, those remedies within also a racial and cultural hierarchy, where the English were like, well, we already know, right, that we're up here, you're somewhere down here. So they were not interested in sort of giving you full credit for having an advanced medical, a sophisticated medical system. So we're going to sort of, we're going to create this narrative where, okay, you might know some stuff about bark and plants, but you don't really have a medical system. You don't really understand medicine the way that we Europeans do. And the English are not the only ones doing it this time. The Spanish are doing very similar constructions. The Dutch, most European groups who are coming to the North American continent at this time are doing this, okay? And that, so you all kind of got that. Now, one of the things I think Robinson does is she gives us a first glimpse, and this is something that we're going to talk about today more for this week. We're going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about this over and over again, and we're going to see this, which is that transformations of medical systems, transformations of medical practice, medical theories, medical understandings of the body, medical practitioners, right? All of those things are primarily motivated by political, economic, social, national, racial concerns and interests, right? I think too often we get these sort of mainstream narratives or popular narratives that, you know, that medicine sort of looked like this for 100 years, and then some really smart guy woke up one day, because it's always a guy, white guy, right? Some really smart white guy woke up someday and went, oh, why have we been talking about humors this whole time? It's really germs. And then, you know, we get germs and everything's great, right? That's not what happens. That's not what has happened. That's not what happens today, right? Instead, we're going to look at so many examples of something else changes, right? Something changes in the politics, something changes in the economic structure, something changes in the sort of cultural values of a society, and that causes a shift within medicine. So Robinson gives us that first little glimpse of that, where she says, and I'm actually going to read a sentence because I think she does a really good job at explaining it. So remember, she brings up humoralism. You got the lecture on humoralism last week. You sort of understand that one of the main tenets of humoralism is that the environment is extremely important, this sort of dynamic interaction between the body and the environment, and that a change in environment could be really dangerous, right? It could be catastrophic even for a particular body. And however, as she points out, This theoretical, and this is page 99 in case you want to read along. This theoretical understanding of human health, in which the body was always at risk from change, was ill-suited to the needs of colonizing power, right? So the British government is very interested in colonizing North America, right? They're very interested in sending lots of different groups of people to extract as much money through natural resources, through labor resources, right? How much money can we get out of this land that we've quote unquote discovered, but really we're just trying to take from other people who've been living there for a long time. However, it's hard to convince people, oh, sail away to this completely new environment if people don't think of their health as being severely at risk by this change of environment. So instead, what they start to do is they start to reformulate the narrative of the role in the environment and of the role of the English in that environment. And then she sort of spends the next couple pages saying, you know, they start to do these other things, like say, well, actually, if you're smart enough, like the English are, then you know that every land, every sort of landscape, every continent, but every sort of land mass, right, creates the plants that are necessary to treat whatever diseases are found in that land. And if you're smart enough, like the English are, then you know how to find those plants. You know that often those plants shape, right, mimics particular parts of the body that tell you how it's to be used. And therefore, the English are going to be okay in this new environment, right? And as many of you picked up, the English are quite happy too, while they're learning, right, a lot of these remedies from indigenous groups all over North America, later they're sort of like, we are so amazing, right? We discovered, not only did we discover this new world, we came here and we thrived in this new environment. We didn't get sick and die like some of these other quote unquote savages that are around us. Okay, but again, this is not someone waking up and being like, oh, I think actually that a change of environment is okay for your health, but as long as you understand the environment, you understand the sort of natural remedies you can find there. No, it's because of this political, the social economic force of colonizing the quote unquote new world that transformed how the English were thinking about humoralism and environment and the impact of the environment on the body. Okay, so that's the sort of first example. I'm going to now bring us to this week's example, which is what happened in Paris at the end of the 1700s. So we're sort of continuing on along in a similar time period as Robinson, but it's a very drastic change, culture change, literally, to go from colonial North America to 1700, middle to late 1700s Paris. Okay. And I'm going to say this right now because I thought this was going to happen and now I can tell it's going to happen. This, unlike a lot of weeks where I am much more committed to sticking to that sort of 30-35 minute time point for the lectures, this week I'm really committed to getting all of this information to you because I think it's really important and it sets up the entire semester. So I can already see I'm at 13 minutes. I'm going to go, my guess is I'm going to go 44 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get us through the French Revolution. And then I'm going to stop at this video and I'm going to start a new one so that if you need to watch these in 2 segments, if you can't, I mean, we have so much screen time now. If you can't just sit here and watch for 45 minutes, I totally understand. I'm going to put it in 2 segments so that it might be easier for all of us involved, me as well. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to set up. I'm going to let you know what's going on in Europe before the French Revolution. I'm going to do the French Revolution in like 2 minutes. There's a whole class you can take if you want more on the French Revolution. Then I'm going to break. We're going to come back in the second half of this video. I'm going to talk about how the revolution changes medicine and what comes after the revolution. Okay? You with me? Good. All right. So what is Europe, really? This is certainly true for France, and this is true for most of Western Europe, certainly at the time, but also parts of Eastern Europe and Russia. What does it look like? And how do we get to eventually what we're going to get to at the end of this, which is something called the Paris Clinic model? That's where I want to get us to at the end of this lecture today, is what is the Paris Clinic model and sort of how was it created? What led to it? And again, spoiler alert, this is not a smart white dude waking up one morning and going, oh my God, this is how we should be figuring out diseases. We've been so stupid, right? Instead, this is, as we're going to see, is largely due to what the French Revolution does to society, to French society, and how it creates new opportunities and it creates new motivations for particular types of healers and particular types of medicine. Okay, but before the revolution, what does medicine look like in Europe? Well, there's two things I want to go over. One is what does medical education look like, and what do hospitals look like? So let's start with medical education. So medical education, in terms of a medical degree, MD, starts around the 1100s, which was when universities in Europe start. And for the most part, from the sort of 1200s to 1700, where we're gonna sort of pick up a change in the action. This medical education doesn't change that much, sort of in its essence. So the idea of a university, of European university in 1500 and 1600 and 1700, is it's a place for rich men, gentlemen, to go and sort of finish themselves, right? You've probably heard the term finishing school for women, especially in the 19th century. Well, this is basically finishing school for gentlemen, men of a certain class, to do throughout most of the medieval and early modern period. It costs money, which is why only men of a certain class are doing it. And it is seen as something that you should do so that you can talk to other people in your social circles, right? And the idea is you go, and as you can see from these scenes, no matter what you're sort of going, what program you're in, essentially in these universities, you're sitting there, you're reading, or more likely you're sitting there and there's some old guy in front of you reading. And he's reading something like Hippocrates. He's reading ancient Greeks, ancient Roman texts, maybe some early medieval stuff. But you sit there for weeks and he reads you out of this book, and you get this book learning, you get this theoretical book learning, and at the end you get a degree. And for the most part, throughout a lot of this time, there's three types of degrees you get at university. You get a degree in religion, so you can become a clergy member. You get a degree in the law, or you get a degree in medicine. And not all of these gentlemen then go practice these professions. Some of this is just sort of your own personal enlightenment, right? You can say, oh, I studied medicine at Cambridge. Oh, well, I studied law at Oxford. And then you can have your little sort of conversations over pipes and brandy after dinner and talk about how awesome you all are because you've read the original Hippocrates in Roman, although it wouldn't be original if it was in Roman. That was a trick. Okay, but this is, again, primarily you are learning from a book. You were never, as someone who gets an MD in 1500, 1600, 1700, you are never actually touching a body before you get an MD, okay? And it turns out that's okay, that gentlemen of this upper class who are getting a medical degree don't really want to touch bodies. That's not what they're going to do as physicians. And so one of the things this new university education system and this new sort of MD gives rise to is this new social stratification of three sort of major groups of healers or practitioners. And where we see this actually the most is in urban areas. I'll talk in a minute about what happens in the rural areas. But in urban areas like Paris, there are actually laws passed. So there's this big one called the Paris Statutes of 1271 that's passed that says, okay, this is how medical practice is going to be regulated in the city of Paris. And it's and this is a hierarchical. So at the top, right, are physicians. And one thing I want to make very clear, if I forget this later, is this hierarchy is not just sort of professional, like these are the people that know more, so they get to be at the top. It is almost purely class-based, right? So the rich white guys are at the top. They're the ones who can afford to go to university. They're the ones who are allowed into the university. Sorry, I forgot to say it before. Women are not allowed into universities at the time, so these are all men. Right? So they go to university, they get their MD, and they are seen as the only ones who by law are allowed to diagnose and treat. And the sort of basis for that is because they have all that book learning, because they read all of Hippocrates, they read all of Galen, they read all of Avicenna. Don't worry if you don't know those names, you can always take a class later about ancient and medieval science and medicine and find out who those people are. But those are the sort of big names that you would read in these universities. Because you've read that, you're the only one who really understands the theory, right? You're the only one who understands humorism in terms of that balance and how to figure it out. So you're the one who can truly tell someone what's wrong with them and how to fix it, okay? So you're the thinking guy. You're the one who's going to do the thought, and you're going to give a diagnosis and treatment, but you're not actually going to do anything. You're not going to touch them. Oh, who would want to do that? Gross. I'm a rich white person. I don't want to touch bodies. We don't do that. We touch books. Who is going to touch the bodies? Well, the next layer down is surgeons. Surgeons have some training. It's not university training. It's usually apprentice-based training, but it's still sort of seen as something that you need to train. You need to sort of have some bit of education. You need to practice this skill. It's seen as a craft. But surgeons, what they're only allowed to do, again, by law, is treat wounds and external problems. And usually this is supposed to be at the behest of a physician. So under the directions of a physician, they can do things like stitch, they can set bones, they can lance boils, they can dig out a foreign body, like a stick that you got poked in your arm, those sorts of things. Now, one thing to say is we will get to where surgery becomes what we sort of recognize as surgery, but really until the late 1800s, surgery does not mean opening up the body and digging around in it. That is something that is untenable to most people before anesthesia and antisepsis. So that's not going to be happening. When we talk about surgeons and surgery in 1700 and throughout most of 1800, it is things on the surface, things you can do quickly, and you're not going very invasively into the body, okay? So we have physicians at the top, surgeons next. So surgeons might be sort of middle class. And then at the bottom are seen, and this is where you do tend to see more women involved, is apothecaries. So apothecary is sort of we would call these druggists or pharmacists sort of today. Apothecary, you might have a lot of knowledge that might have been passed down to you from another family member, from someone else that you studied, that you sort of learned from, but you know a lot about minerals and botanicals. And so you know how to make particular medications, a tea, a tincture, a salve that you would rub on the body. But you are not allowed by law, again in Paris, by law, you're not allowed to just sort of look at someone and be like, ooh, I've got something for that rash. Here you go. That's breaking the law. You're only allowed to give to that person if that person said, I, spent 600 francs for Dr. Smith. No, it's a French name for Dr. Godot. That's fine. If you don't know Dr. Godot, that's fine. If you do, that's kind of funny. For Dr. Godot down the street, and he said, I need this tincture or I need this salve. Okay, so again, there's this power hierarchy and this class hierarchy that is being set up by physicians, right? Because physicians, being those rich white men, they're friends with the lawmakers. They're friends with the lawyers. They were buddies at college, the University of Paris or the University of Montpellier. And the physicians are like, can we really be in charge of this whole system? And the lawyer's like, sure, I'll write a law. And then they all get together and they pass the law. And there you go. Okay, now, one thing I want to point out here is that this is only in Paris, sorry. The majority of the French population who does not live in France, and France, while it is a big city, it's still sort of, I would have to double check this, but I want to say maybe sort of like 100,000 at the time in 1700. So it's, by the standards of the time, it's a big city. But it's not sort of our definition of a big city. This is not Paris of today. So there's still the majority of the French population lives in rural areas. And you know what? The physicians, they don't care what's happening in the rural areas. They're like, do whatever you want. We don't care who's diagnosing. We don't care who's treating. We don't care who's mixing herbs for who and why. Because the physicians only want to practice in a place where they can make money, because that's the style of life to which they're accustomed to. They are not interested, in going out and treating a peasant who might, if you're lucky, be able to give you a pig in recompense for saving your life. Okay, so they can't make money in the rural areas. They also can't increase their social status, right? How do you sustain and maybe elevate your social status as a physician, as a rich physician in Paris? You save the life of the princess, or you save the life of a duchess, right? That's how it doesn't matter if you save 13 peasants who got caught under an ox cart. Nobody cares about that in the sort of elite circles of Paris. So all the physicians, they want to stay in urban areas. That's where they want to practice. So these laws don't really, so outside of urban areas, there is a medical free market. There is no one saying, do you have the proper education to be a healer? No, the sort of most common decision of how do I get a healer is, oh, I know that person, they're close to me, they're geographically proximate, I don't have to go very far. I can afford them because they'll take 6 eggs for that tea that they make that always helps my sore throat. And we're what's the word I want to say? Reputation, right? I've heard at the tavern that 6 other people had the same sore throat, and her tea cured them all, right? So that's the sort of market system, free market system of medicine that's happening in rural areas. And this, mostly what I've been talking here is France, but this is very similar in Britain. This is very similar in Spain at the time. It's very similar in the German states at the time, okay? So this is sort of the medical hierarchy and the medical education prior to the French Revolution. One more quick thing before I get to the French Revolution, then we're gonna take a little break. Okay, the other thing is hospitals. What is a hospital prior to the French Revolution? Well, a hospital, I'm gonna do this so you can, ta-da. A hospital is not a place of medicine at all. A hospital is a building that is run by a charitable organization, and most of them, like this one here, are run by religious organizations. And it's much more akin to a homeless shelter than a modern day hospital, right? The idea is these are institutions for the poorest of the poor, for people who do not have families, because if you're sick, that's who's supposed to take care of you, right? In your home is your family. Hospitals are for people who don't have anyone to take care of them. And so they enter a hospital where they can get a bed, they can get some chicken broth, but also they're probably going to get things like communion and a lot of prayer and a lot of God. So this is not a place where anyone is thinking about medicine, about healing. This is a place that is sort of, where you would go as a very last resort. And for most inhabitants of France, they have no interest in ever going to this place. It is a place, again, that means you have no one in your life to help you or to take care of you. And most French people know that the sort of most likely way that you leave is down here in this corner. See what these nuns are doing? They're stitching up dead bodies in burial cloths, so that even people who are sort of literally sort of crossing the threshold of these buildings are thinking, I guess this is where I'm going to die, because so many people die here. Okay, so that's what a hospital is prior to the revolution. It's grim. Yeah, no one really wants to do it. It's not an exciting place. And there are no physicians involved at all. Physicians do not see this as a useful place to learn anything or to sort of, improve their practice or anything. This does not fit in. And one of the things I'm not going to go into because I'm already been blabbing for so long, but one thing to think about is how this actually doesn't fit within a humoristic model of how do you understand how to treat someone. Okay, but let's sort of zoom forward a little bit. Okay, then we get the French Revolution. This is usually typically used as the beginning of the French Revolution, as the storming of the Bastille in 1789. And again, I'm not going to do much with sort of what the revolution was about and who got killed and beheaded and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to really distill it down to the 3 things that I want you to know about the revolution, because those are the things that really impact medicine and medical practice, okay? So very quickly again, French Revolution from 1789 to 1799. One of the things it did is it rid France of a class system, right? So this revolution is one of working class people, of peasants uprising because they are pissed at the monarchy. They're pissed at this class system that says just because you're born into an upper class family means you should have all the opportunities of the world. And if you're born in a lower class family, you should get no opportunities. So one of the sort of purposes of the revolution and results of the revolution is that this sort of differentiation, this class stratification is in theory gone. And anyone who wants to hold on to it, which are mostly, right, those who used to be in power, so the upper class who say, but I'm about the upper class, those are the ones who tend to be killed off the most quickly. So that also helps get rid of the class system, is because the people who are benefiting from the class system are being killed. The other thing it does is it rids France of very established old institutions, because most of those institutions are either directly tied to the class system, right? They're supported by the class system, or they are seen as symbols of the class system. So a great example of this is the church, right? So the church, the sort of established church in France at the time is literally, some of them are torn down, but they're sort of a reformulation of religion. But also universities are torn down, and the educational system through the universities is seen as part of this class system, so it needs to be completely demolished and something else needs to be put in its place. And finally, France is also not just involved in this 10-year revolution where people are fighting, there's all sorts of economic and political turmoil and social turmoil. France also then has to spend another 10 years in what we call the Revolutionary Wars, because it turns out while all this is happening in France, right, where literally the sort of lower classes are rising up and killing the monarchs, there are many other European countries who are run by monarchs who have the same class system, who are like, oh shit, we got to do something here, guys. We do not want our peasants to hear about this, to think that this is a good idea. So France, the new sort of revolutionary-led France, is involved in numerous wars with other European countries. And so there's lots of battles, okay? All right, I'm going to take a break, or not really a break. What I'm going to do is stop this video and immediately starting recording the next one, but you can now take a break because I've hit the 30-minute mark and I know that I have at least 15 more minutes to go. Okay, so go, and as my child's kindergarten teacher would say, go take a potty break, have some water, get your wiggles out, have a sip of bourbon, whatever you need to do, and I'll see you in just one moment.